my whole phone just went black. It's not like the app just quit. This time my whole phone just went blah, 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 and my whole phone just went black. I've never seen that one before. It's a weird one. I have no idea what's going on. We're having a hurricane outside and thunderstorms, and I was ranting about suburban kids and middle class, deviation of socialism and whatever. I think I made my point on that. I don't know what happened. My whole phone just went black, and then now we're back. So someone post the link, please, in the old chat so they all come back. Post the link. Post the link. We're back. We're not going anywhere. Nice try, Silicon Valley fascists. Nice try. Well, we don't know what it was, technical difficulties or what, I don't even know. This happens so many times. I don't care. I just keep doing what I'm doing. I just keep doing what I'm doing. That's all that I can do. Here we are. Here we are. We're not going anyplace. The next question, the next super chat question I have is there a danger of Vietnam or Cuba being invaded? I actually think that there is a significantly less danger of Vietnam or Cuba being invaded than there has been in a long time. And that is because Vietnam and Cuba are aligned with Russia and China. Now, Vietnam has some tension with China, so Vietnam and China, there's a lot of bad blood there, but they're definitely aligned with Russia. And they're definitely part of the anti-imperialist camp, even though that China and them have some bad blood, but they still trade with each other and have relations with each other and such. So, the thing is, it used to be that the United States could just roll into Iraq. Remember that? The United States could just invade Iraq, and the world couldn't be able to stop them. And there was the situation in Libya and such. But it seems like nowadays, the power of Russia and China to deter these kind of situations. You look at Syria, where all this time, how much have they thrown at the Syrian government? They haven't been able to overthrow it. How much have they thrown at the Venezuelan government? They haven't been able to invade. I mean, they haven't been able to invade Venezuela yet. They haven't been able to actually, it looks to me like the power of these, thank you, bro. Oh, sure thing, Rayborn. I just keep going. The power of the United States to just invade and overthrow countries that resist it is significantly weakened. Right? There is a check on U.S. imperial hegemony, right? The rise of the two Eurasian superpowers, Russia and China, that significantly weakened U.S. imperialism. That has absolutely happened. And folks need to recognize that. So I don't think that Vietnam and Cuba are being invaded. If anything, I would expect that there is an effort on the part of the Biden administration to try and court Vietnam and Cuba. Right, and that was a big strategy of Zbigniew Brzezinski during the Cold War, was they talked about like Soviet satellite countries, about how the target had to be the Soviet Union, but part of what they did was they courted the satellites. Right, during this time, you'll remember Libya. Billy Carter went to go hang out with Gaddafi. Right, Libya was a Soviet-aligned country, but Jimmy Carter sent his brother, Billy Carter, to go party with Gaddafi, and they had drinking parties. And Libya ended up supporting the United States in Afghanistan against the Soviet Union. And Libyan-Soviet relations took a negative turn because the vice president's, the president of the United States, his brother was going to drink with Gaddafi, and the USA was getting friendlier to Libya, it seemed like, during the years of Jimmy Carter. Now, what was that about? Well, that was just a strategy. It was about weakening the Soviet Union. Right? And that Carter also lifted some restrictions on Cuba. And what Obama was trying to do when he went to Cuba and established diplomatic relations, he was trying to, distance Cuba from China and Russia. Right? There was talk of a Chinese military base in Cuba. Well, now, when Obama went there and, established relations, now there's no more talk of that. Right? And that, if anything, the strategy of the United States, especially under Biden, is going to be more to court these countries and court the countries that they view as satellites, And that's the weird thing, right? And they don't view Russia or China as a satellite. I don't think they view Iran as a satellite. They view those countries as being, strongholds or whatever. But there are certain countries that they're going to view as satellites. They view them as smaller countries that are dependent on the bigger anti-imperialist countries. And those countries, they are going to try to very much going to try to flip. They're going to try to do everything they can to get them into a more neutral position. And they've done this with Vietnam quite a bit. The USA is very well aware of the history of China's kind of opportunism against Vietnam, right? China's support for Pol Pot, etc. The years of tension between Vietnamese people and Chinese people. And the USA has very much tried to work that angle. There's been U.S. military ships that have docked in Vietnam. And, but then in Vietnam, there are different perspectives. In the Vietnamese Communist Party, there's a lot of people who say the U.S. imperialists are their main enemy. And, so it's not totally going to work. Sorry. But that's how the game is played. That's how the game is played. So that's just something to be aware of. So, yeah. All right. Next question. All right. Lenin versus Luxemburg on their theories of imperialism. Well, I know about one aspect of that debate. I don't know specifically about the economic concepts that were different. I know there were differences in their concept of imperialism economically. But the main difference between Lenin and Luxemburg, that's Rosa Luxemburg, the German Marxist and socialist, and Vladimir Lenin. Thanks, mods, for the link here. You got it. I just keep rolling ahead. Vladimir Lenin said that it was the duty of socialists to support the struggle for national liberation by oppressed nationalities, right? That whenever there was a nation fighting for its national liberation, it was the duty of communists, to support that nation, right? And that, Lenin said that, even the Emir of Afghanistan, even though he was a monarchist, right? He was progressive because he was fighting the British Empire. That a nation fighting the imperialists is always correct. Rosa Luxemburg, on the other hand, argued, she said that all nationalism is inherently reactionary, right? She argued that nations and nationalism always weaken the working class and divide the working class. And that was a fundamental difference between the two groups. And that the main reason that Rosa Luxemburg took that position is that she was born in Poland. She was a Jewish woman who was born in Poland. And the Polish nationalists who fought against the various imperialists were very barbaric and reactionary and anti-Semitic and such. And on that basis, she argued that that the Polish national liberation struggle just obscured the class struggle, and she took the position opposing all nationalism. And she was living in Germany in the lead up to World War I. She opposed World War I, went to prison for opposing World War I. She wrote a very beautiful pamphlet opposing World War I called the Junius Pamphlet, which I've read, which I would recommend folks read. Rosa Luxemburg's writing is very, very, very good. I would recommend people read her writing. She's a very, very, very good writer, very analytical, very economically based, and it's good stuff. And Rosa Luxemburg, living in Germany, where German nationalism was the hotbed of the basis for World War I, she just argued that nationalism is inherently reactionary, right? Well, Lenin said no. If a colonized people, if a group of people are fighting for their national liberation, that's a good thing. So that was a difference. But as far as the economics, I don't know the specifics. I can't explain the economics of the difference. So there you go. Withdrawal from Afghanistan and the decline of U.S. empire. This is I.O. Hillary's question. Well, look, I think the United States just made a strategic decision. And the question was, is it better for us to continue occupying Afghanistan, or can we, basically hand it over to the Taliban? Excuse me. Can we just hand it over to the Taliban? Look, part of me, on the one hand, this isn't Vietnam. The Taliban is not, Ho Chi Minh. They're not the National Liberation Front of Vietnam. But at the same time, the U.S. is losing control, right? And the Taliban is going to join the Belt and Road. And the Taliban, as bad as the Taliban is, they're more independent. And they'll do business with whoever they need to. And so this is the USA being defeated. To some degree or other, the USA has just said, you know what? Afghanistan, you can have it, Taliban. You do what you want with it. Well, I mean, now it's important to point out a lot of the Taliban leaders who are stepping up now are people that the USA has kind of handpicked and such, but there's no guarantee. I mean, the USA handpicked Maliki to run Iraq, and look, he ended up being friendly to Iran, and the USA, handpicked a lot of the Iraqi leaders, and the result was that they ended up becoming becoming more pro-Iranian, and the USA would then have to remove them again. So just, I think that this is, yes, and this is a moment where economic development could come to Afghanistan, and the result could be people being lifted out of poverty, and let's hope that more stability comes to that part of the world. The USA was using Afghanistan as a strategic center of instability, with that chaos spreading over to Russia, China, and into Iran. Well, it looks like now the USA is pulling out, and so that creates the opportunity, not guaranteed, the opportunity that something good could come out of this, right? If the Belt and Road comes in there, economic development comes in there, there's potential. The next question is, why do some defend Cuba but not China? Well, first of all, if they do that, they're wrong, right? Because nobody's more pro-China than Cuba is, right? You should read, that, Fidel Castro, in one of his columns, he said Xi Jinping is one of the most competent and capable revolutionary communist leaders he's ever met in his life. Fidel Castro loved Xi Jinping. He loved the Chinese Communist Party. He criticized Mao in the 70s, but he loves Xi Jinping. Fidel spoke glowingly about the Chinese Communist Party. So, and Cuba is in the process of transitioning to what they call to either the Vietnamese or the Cuban economic model, or the Chinese economic model, and the Cuban Communist Party is studying extensively the achievements of the Chinese Communist Party. They want their economy to be more like the Chinese economy, but Cuba, and this is the thing. There's a lot of people in the United States. There's a long history of people in the United States that are sympathetic to Cuba, that are not sympathetic to any other socialist country. And that's that. I mean, look, there are a lot of Zionists who like Cuba. I kid you not. There are a lot of people that are fervent supporters of Israel, think that Israel can do no wrong, who also like Fidel Castro. That exists. There are a lot of, social democrats who hate Venezuela and hate China, hate Russia, hate Vietnam, and somehow they think Cuba is good. I will say that Cuba is very close to the United States, and it's not that hard to visit. It's technically illegal to visit, but they don't enforce the law. I mean, you can't spend money there, basically. But they don't prosecute people for going to Cuba. And there's a lot of people from various political strands in the United States who, for whatever reason, like Cuba. And they don't like any of Cuba's friends. They don't like any other anti-imperialist states. The U.S. Socialist Workers Party is a great example. The Pathfinder tendency, the U.S. SWP. They do not agree with anything about Cuban foreign policy. They think Venezuela's fascist. They think Ecuador's fascist. But they just, Cuba's a great socialist society. They like Cuba, but they don't like Cuba's foreign policy. They don't like Cuba's allies. They don't like, it's beyond me. They don't even like the Cuban political line, but somehow, they would have you believe they're the party of Fidel Castro. It's very bizarre. It's very strange. And, many people have pointed out that one thing that makes Cuba more likable to Americans, especially American leftists, is cultural, right? The USA, we have a very big Latin American influence in the United States. The Southwest United States used to be part of Mexico until it was stolen in the Mexican-American War. There's a lot of Latin American folks in the United States, and Cuba, there used to be a lot of U.S. tourism there. And for whatever reason, when you go to Cuba, it's, they're on a cultural level, it's much easier to relate. The cult of personality, for example, right? That's one thing that North Korea gets just hammered on, right? Here in the United States, We just hear, oh my God, North Korea, they have got the picture of the great leader everywhere. That's a cult. That's authoritarianism. Aren't you offended by that? Oh my God, it's extreme. Well, you go to South Korea. Go to South Korea, right? Which is supposed to be the free capitalist part. You know, in the companies in South Korea, if you work at, a car company or a cell phone company in South Korea, they often have a very extreme personality cult around the CEO. Did you know that? Right? It's very common at South Korean companies, capitalist corporations, for there to be an extreme cult of personality around the CEO. And the CEO's picture is everywhere, and people study the sayings of the CEO. Right? The Unification Church. I've ranted about the Moonies and all of that, right? Again, that's a big, it's a really big religious group that's in South Korea that is like, it's like the group that everyone points to and says that's a cult. Well, it's tied to American intelligence, but it operates out of South Korea. A lot of this is cultural. A lot of this is cultural, right? And of course, in Cuba, I mean, is there a cult of personality? Do people, worship Fidel? Did they worship, Che Guevara and stuff? Sure. But it manifested itself very differently, right? People talked about it differently. And because of that, Americans, when they went to Cuba, they weren't creeped out by it, right? They went to Cuba and it just seemed like, okay, he's the president. They really like him. They think he's a good guy. They think Fidel's a good guy. Right, but when we look at North Koreans doing in their culture what is the same thing, which is saying, hey, we've got a president we really like, but we have his picture everywhere and we quote him in this way, we think it's creepy. It's a cultural difference. That's really what it is. It's a cultural difference. And that in a lot of ways, a lot of things that, that Americans can go to Cuba and relate to it on a cultural level in ways, all right, nationalize. Oh, change your super chat. I don't know. Do we allow that here? Right. Nationalize utilities. So nationalize Amazon. Amazon. All right. Big tech. All right. All right. You change your super chat. All right. And, culturally, it's easier for Americans to go to Cuba and like what they see. And things in North Korea seem a lot more foreign and a lot more rigid and authoritarian, but it's not, these are not differences that are, it's not like the two countries have the different system. And that's one thing that Michael Parenti has pointed out in a number of his lectures, that the economic system of Cuba, the political and economic model of Cuba, and the political and economic model of all of Eastern Europe and North Korea, and really existing in socialism in the Cold War, is not that different. In Cuba, they had Stakhanovism. They still do. It's called emulation, right? And they reward people who work the hardest in the factory, right? In the Soviet Union, they called it Stakhanovism, where it's the person who worked the hardest got an award, right? They have, one party, right? The Communist Party that's in charge. They have 5-year plans. It's pretty basic. The Cuban system, it's actually closer to the Cold War socialist model than it's much closer to what existed in the Soviet Union than what China or Vietnam have. They'd like to transition to be more like China or Vietnam. So, it's weird. The kind of like Cuba is good, but all the other socialist countries are bad. That's a strange aspect of U.S. leftism that you'll get. You'll get that on the U.S. left. You'll get people in the American left who, I like Cuba, but I don't like any other socialist country. It's not a logically consistent position. And a lot of right-wingers will point that out. Right? A lot of right-wingers will actually point that out and say, you know what? That's not a logically consistent position. And they'd say that they're all bad. Well, no, I think that most of the socialist countries are good overwhelmingly in what they've achieved. But, they're all good, not just Cuba, I would argue. So there you go. Yeah. All right. Next point. All right. Germany is taking in Afghan refugees. How many should they accept? I don't know. These refugees, you have to remember, these are the people that were aligned with the Western capitalist countries, right? That's why they're fleeing, is because they fear retaliation and punishment from the Taliban. So I mean, I don't know, if you're in a country and you're arming people and you're giving them weapons and you're backing them up to fight their own people, and then you change your mind, don't you kind of have an obligation to like get them out of there before the other side comes and kills? I mean, I'm right. I mean, hypothetically speaking, right? I mean, if this was any country, if you're occupying a country with your military, and then you pick out people from that population to be kind of like collaborators with your occupation, and then one day you're kind of like, oh no, no, we're not going to do this anymore, and you can't leave those people out to dry, right? You gotta bring those people back. I mean, it's just kind of basic. Um, and if you don't do that, then are people ever going to work with you as a country again? It's like, oh, okay, well, the United States, I worked with the United States, or I worked with Germany, I worked with NATO to help occupy Afghanistan. And then they changed their minds, and instead of letting me get the hell out of the country, they kind of just left me there to get executed by my own people for being a collaborator with the imperialists. Not very good PR. So I mean, it would be in Germany and the United States geopolitical interest to, look like they're helping out these collaborators, right? I mean, and that's kind of what we're seeing in U.S. media. I mean, U.S. media is castigating Biden over this, and that's kind of what they're saying. They just don't want to put it in those nasty terms. They want to put it in the terms of, oh, these people want to be Americans, right? Dare to win. All right, Mao. Very good. All right. Dare to win. Mao. Meaning. All righty. All right. Very good. Okay, next question. Okay, online people not support a jail in the United Kingdom. Is this person? I think this person is trying to talk about Julian Assange, right? And Julian Assange is a political prisoner, and they should release him. Um, I think that's what the person was hinting at with their question. They worded it in a very odd, strange way, but that's what I think they were getting at. Free Julian Assange. The attack on Julian Assange is an attack on freedom of the press for everybody. Alrighty. Favorite animals? Well, I've never had a pet in my life. Did you know that? I've never had a pet, a cat or a dog. Never did I have a pet. And when it comes to favorite animals, I mean, I don't know. I mean, dogs are cute, especially small dogs. I like to hug them. They're really adorable. I'm not too much of a cat guy. When I go over to someone's house and they have a cat and that cat has peed in the house, I can smell it, and I don't like that smell. If there's somebody watching right now, and you have cat pee in your house, I apologize. I mean, no offense, but just the smell of cat pee I don't like, and cats don't ever seem to want to cuddle either. They just, they kind of like run away from you or whatever. Dogs I like. I've never had one though. Never had a pet of my own, so I can't really comment on that. But there you go. Someone said they like the Saxton lectures. Well, number 4 is coming. The Saxton lecture, and there are 5 more total to come, right? There are 4-part lectures. It was 4-part classes I gave. Saxton lectures part 4. There's lecture number 1 and lecture number 2, but they're all in 4 parts. So plenty more where that came from. Tune in and watch the Saxton lectures. They're called the Saxton lectures, President Jesus, because they were filmed in Saxton, Pennsylvania. That's the location. There's a small town in Pennsylvania called Saxton, and that is where we had our gathering. So that's why they're called the Saxton lectures. So there you go. And they are a very good point of reference. It's a very, it's a thorough introduction to the city building tendency and our unique anti-imperialist socialist worldview. So there you go. They were filmed in Saxon, PA. All right. I Saw New Poland. That's a book by Anna Louise Strong. And someone said, why do Eastern European immigrants dislike communism? Because they wouldn't have left. The Eastern European immigrants who came to the United States from Eastern Europe are the ones who didn't like communism. That's why they came here, right? Just kind of like, during the Civil War, I've often made the analogy, if you watch Gone with the Wind, that's one perspective on the Civil War. That's Miss Scarlett and Scarlett O'Hara. I do declare, Captain Butler, frankly, my dear, I don't give a damn. If you watch Gone with the Wind, the racist movie from the 1930s, the classic U.S. movie, one of the most famous movies in U.S. history. If you watch that movie, the perspective that it gives on the U.S. Civil War is not very accurate. It gives a perspective that's pretty much the pro-slavery perspective. But that's how Scarlett O'Hara saw it. And if Scarlett O'Hara had fled to another country after the Civil War, she would tell people that perspective. And the perspective you're getting from folks in Eastern, who fled from the Soviet Union, you're getting one side of the perspective. Wars tend to have two sides on them. And generally, bad, awful, horrendous things happen in wars. And so, it's not as simple as you might think, right? There's kind of an oversimplified view of this, but it's like, when you talk to, people who fled to the United States from Ukraine, or people who fled to the United States from, Poland or Lithuania, they're going to give you the perspective of, I hate the people, the communists, so much. That's why I fled to the capitalist West. But they don't represent their populations. Poll after poll after poll after poll shows that people in Eastern Europe overwhelmingly say life was better before the overthrow of socialism. So they don't represent their respective populations. They represent themselves, right? They're exiles. They're expats. So there you go. All right. All right. Spanish versus British colonialism in America. Oh, well, there's a pretty big difference, which was that Spain was largely still a feudal country at the time of the colonization of the United States, or of the Americas, I should say. It was mostly South America. Spain was still a feudal country, whereas Britain had, transitioned fully to capitalism. And Spain, their ability to, operate was kind of restricted by the fact that they were still a feudal society. Right, the Spanish Inquisition started shortly around the time that Christopher Columbus, went on his voyage, and that Spain was largely feudal. It hadn't had a full transition to a capitalist model, whereas Britain was adopting, it was moving toward that wealth of nations, Adam Smith, global free trade economic model. And they colonized with very different intentions. Spain colonized, trying to have slavery, trying to find gold, trying to get something for the monarchy of Spain or whatever. The British were developing capitalism and developing capitalist industries, and the East India Company, and trying to control the trade routes and such. So it was a different mode of economy. And that was the difference. And that the way the occupations panned out was quite different, right? And that we saw in South America, largely they were, I want to say this right. I don't want to say this wrong. And so it's like, I don't want to get ahead of myself, but, the American Revolution largely was the fact that the USA developed a domestic capitalist class. There were American capitalists who came from Britain who set up shop in the 13 colonies, and they wanted to get rich and become wealthy. And the British said, no, we want you to just kind of be vassals, and we want you to be a trading hub in our global empire. We don't want that. But this domestic capitalist class developed in the United States, and they fought for independence because they wanted to become wealthy. Well, the Spanish generally, they didn't set up much of a domestic capitalist class. What they set up were landowners who functioned almost like nobles. Right, the landowning class. They did have, the Spanish had settlers, but they were almost like aristocrats that they set up in the countries they colonized, because Spain was still largely in the feudal mode of production. They didn't build up a domestic business class per se. I mean, there was some of that, but largely Spain was in the feudal mode of production, and that that it manifested itself very differently. So there you go. All right. Okay. Neoliberal versus neocons. Well, okay. Here's the thing you have to remember, okay? Neoliberal is an economic term. Neoconservative is a political term, okay? And they're not opposites. In politics, you talk about liberals versus conservatives. The term neoliberal has nothing to do with politics. It's an economic theory. Economic liberalism is when the state is not involved in the economy. Liberalism, right? Economic liberal means government not involved, right? And economic liberalism means the government is not involved. Neoliberalism was Milton Friedman and Alan Greenspan, adopting some of the ideas of Friedrich von Hayek and the Montpellier Society, and arguing that the the Keynesian consensus, that after World War II there was an adjustment in economic thinking where they felt that you needed a welfare state, you needed the government involved, rolling back the Keynesian consensus and saying we can privatize everything. Neoliberalism is an economic movement. It is not a political movement, right? People think neoliberal means moderate Democrat. No, it doesn't. It means it is an economic theory. It is the idea that the government should not be involved in the economy. It's economic liberalism. It's, you know, you know, you have classical liberalism, classical liberals, right? Those are, the classical, that's, classical, neoclassical economics, classical liberals. That's just standard free market thinking. Then you had the rise of the Keynesian consensus after World War II. John Maynard Keynes came in and said the government should spend money and we need a welfare state, etc. Then, in response to the Keynesian consensus, you have what's called neoliberalism. And neoliberalism is we can go back to liberalism. We can go back, just like someone's now walking around nowadays, they're not a Nazi, they're a neo-Nazi because they want to go back to Hitler's ideas. It's not the same when people do it now because World War II was a long time ago, right? Well, neoliberalism, right? It's not the same as classical liberalism. It's not the same as Adam Smith, right? They want to do it now after the Keynesian consensus, right? They want to regress. They want to adopt neoliberal economic policies. It's an economic theory. Neoconservatism is a political school of thought. It's not about economics. It's about how to govern, right? It's related to the government. And it's mainly not even really about the government. It's about political strategy. It's how political parties should operate. Neoconservatism is the political theories of Irving Kristol and Leo Strauss. And Irving Kristol was a Trotskyite who set up the CIA Congress for Cultural Freedom program, eventually became a Republican Party strategist, Irving Kristol. His son is Bill Kristol of the Weekly Standard. And then on top of that, there's Leo Strauss, who was a philosophy professor, and he was at New School and eventually at the University of Chicago. And they had their political theories. Neoliberalism as an economic theory and neoconservatism as a political theory walk hand in hand. In fact, it was mainly neoconservatives who implemented neoliberal economic policies, right? The Reagan administration was very much an advocate, a very open, blatant advocate of neoliberalism. So neoliberal and neoconservative are not opposites. They are separate schools of thought. And it is a big pet peeve of mine when I hear people use neoliberal to mean moderate Democrat. It annoys me because the word neoliberal, it has a specific meaning. It refers to an economic theory, not a political one. Neoliberal is economic. Neoconservative is political. All right. Next question. How can the pink tide of Latin America become an enduring phenomenon? Well, it already is. It already is an enduring phenomenon. The pink tide of Latin America, look, you can go back to, Salvador Allende. The pink tide of Latin America, the roots of it go back to the fact that after the Cold War ended, in the 80s and 90s, as the Cold War was coming to an end, capitalism in Latin America transitioned to a quote-unquote open society model, right? Prior to the Cold War, or prior to the end of the Cold War, in most of Latin America, you had military juntas. You had these military dictatorships, that were kind of Bonapartist regimes that would crush the communists. But then, as, the Cold War ended, the threat of communist revolution was not there. And there was a need on the part of U.S. leaders for austerity, but military juntas were not very good at implementing austerity because the way a military dictator stays in power is he hands out the goods to all his buddies, and the military kind of controls sections of the economy, and it's a form of Bonapartism. So the USA dismantled these military dictatorships, and it's a weird moment where, again, it was like the liberal, like George Soros wing of the American establishment and the communists were kind of on the same side in this period, protesting, bringing down Pinochet, calling for free elections. And it doesn't seem to make sense, but it does make sense, right? Maduro's claim that the deep state is undermining Biden. I addressed that on the last stream, but all right. wrote it down. But, they were transitioning to a more open society model because then you could implement austerity. Austerity generally wants a weak government that can't do anything. And because the government, is just weak and doesn't do anything, the corporations can just roll right over it, right? Whereas military juntas, they tend to have like Bonapartist, economic policies. They got to hand out the goods to somebody, etc. So as Latin America was transitioning to quote unquote open societies and having free elections again, and not just having these military juntas rule, the communists of Latin America, which were a big factor because of Cuba and because of, you're very welcome. I'm glad you like it. Because of Cuba and because of, the years of struggle and organizing, the communist movement in Latin America is very big. And the communists made a strategic reorientation. And they started operating and building, anti-neoliberalism, anti-austerity popular fronts. And because of that, they were able to win some elections. And because of the rise of China and Russia and geopolitically, that led to some realignment. So the pink tide was very much a result it was a result of the opening up, so to speak, of Latin American countries that created a new opening to organize. It was a result of the USA pushing neoliberal economic policies, and it was also the result of Russia and China emerging, providing them an ally to trade with. All of that kind of, pushed for, a situation where you could have the pink tide. And then they said the pink tide was dead, and it wasn't. And that, yes, as long as there is, as Mao says in the Little Red Book, wherever there is oppression, there is resistance. As long as U.S. imperialism is oppressing the people of Latin America, there's going to be resistance from the people of Latin America. And especially due to the history of that region, that's going to be communists that are going to be a big part of that resistance. But I mean, communists obviously have the answer, but communists also have a really big amount of influence in Latin America. So because of that, you're going to have a pink tide. And the more that they come in, the more, nowhere near the ground floor, so I don't have to worry about that. But, the more that these things happen, the more that you're going to have resistance. So something like the pink tide is going to exist. So there you go. All right. Historically significant events in the history of U.S. communism that people don't know about. One historically important event in the history of U.S. communism that people don't know about is the Greensboro Massacre of 1979. Very few people know about this. In 1979, the Communist Workers' Party, which was a Maoist communist group in North Carolina, challenged the Ku Klux Klan to a fight. They sent a letter to the KKK. They said, "We're having a death to the Ku Klux Klan rally, and we challenge you to show your faces." And they had a death to the Klan rally in North Carolina. And they had this rally in Greensboro, North Carolina, and the KKK showed up and shot 5 of their members. And there was a TV crew there that filmed the whole thing. It's all on film. And after the Klansmen shot the 5 communists, they were acquitted in court and found not guilty. That was the Greensboro Massacre of 1979. A very famous incident that folks haven't heard of, right? It was... I've made videos about it. I've talked about it. It was a very, very important moment, and it was national news at the time that there was this, this massacre of communists in North Carolina. And it was revealed that some of the Klansmen who killed the communists were FBI agents. And it was a horrendous incident. But you can go further back than that. Incidents in communist U.S. history that people don't know about. I'm trying to think. Wow. I'm trying to think. We can go further back than that. There's got to be plenty more than that. I mean, you can talk about when Earl Browder went to prison for a passport violation. Earl Browder, the leader of the Communist Party USA, he was a supporter of the 1939 Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact. And he supported the Soviet Union signing a pact with Nazi Germany, a non-aggression pact. And so Roosevelt threw him in prison. right? We always think of the Communist Party as being part of the Roosevelt coalition, but there was a brief moment during the 1939 pact where the Communist Party and Roosevelt were at odds. Roosevelt, was very angry that the Soviet Union would sign that pact with Nazi Germany, so they sent Earl Browder to federal prison. And it was a passport violation. They claimed that he didn't fill out his passport forms correctly. That's basically what they got him for, that he fraudulently filled out his passport forms. That's what they got him for. And they sent Earl Browder to federal prison. That's a very famous incident, and there was a campaign to free Earl Browder. And they tried to deport his wife. They tried to deport her from the country. It was a big incident. And then when World War II broke out, they were on the same side again. So it was all history. But yeah, there was a brief moment where Roosevelt was fighting with the Communist Party pretty viciously and sent Earl Browder to federal prison. So there's that. There's that whole thing. What else? What else is there? Go back further to I don't know, in the 1936 presidential election. How, the Communist Party ran Earl Browder for president, but they told their members to vote for Roosevelt. And the main thrust of the Communist Party's campaign was democracy or fascism. Where they were urging people to vote for Roosevelt and defeat fascism. You can go further back than that. There was a convention of the Communist Party in 1928 where they expelled the American exceptionalists. J. Lovestone and his faction, they said that the United States, Marxism didn't apply to the United States. The USA was an exception. So the very term American exceptionalism, that was what Stalin accused J. Lovestone, who was a leader of the U.S. Communist Party, of believing in. He was an American exceptionalist. And that's become like a term that's widely used. People talking about American exceptionalism. Well, it actually comes from J. Lovestone. So there you go. Those are a couple incidents that I bet you all hadn't heard of. All right, we're getting through this because my throat is giving out and I'm getting tired, but that's okay. We're getting through this. Fall allergies, right? There you go. Yugoslavia's break with Stalin, is it similar to China? Well, no, it's not similar to China. So in 1948, Yugoslavia broke with the Soviet Union. Very famous, the Soviet Union, Yugoslavia broke with them. 1948. Yugoslavia immediately became friendly to the United States. It sided with the USA during the Korean War. Whereas China, their break with the Soviet Union, they first tried to be more radical than the Soviet Union. The Soviet Union was getting closer to the United States with Khrushchev at that point. China became more radical. And eventually, yes, China did get into the U.S., did start to pivot toward the United States, but that didn't happen until the late 60s. But for the first, 10 years, the first 8 or 9 years of the Soviet Union's, break with China, they were seen as the more radical faction. They were seen as the crazy extremists. U.S. media portrayed them as the crazy extremists, and the Soviets were the sympathetic ones. They were they were communists who were, not totally trustworthy, but they weren't so bad. It was the Chinese were considered the extreme, the extreme anti-imperialists. Eventually China pivoted into the U.S. camp, but there was a shift. But yeah, Yugoslavia immediately went into the U.S. camp, immediately. And there was some fear that Mao might become another Tito, right? And you can read documents where the Soviet Union was suspicious of Mao, even while the Stalin was still alive. They had fear of Mao becoming like Tito. Mao never did become like Tito. Well, I guess maybe he did in the final years of his life, but that's not how China presented itself. Throughout the early 60s, up until 1969, China, presented itself very differently, and yeah, there you go. All right. The Spartacist League's intervention in East Germany. They talk about this. The Spartacist League is a Trotskyite group in the United States. It's the Orthodox Trotskyists. They talk about some intervention they did in East Germany during the fall of the Eastern Bloc or something. I don't know anything about it, honestly. And they are notorious for exaggerating their own role in events. And I have never heard anybody else talk about it, only them. And I mean, I don't know what it was. I guess as Eastern Europe was, as East Germany was having its counter-revolution, they were there saying, well, what we need is real communism or something like that. And okay. I mean, I know they did it. I mean, I believe they did it, but I don't consider it to be a great achievement or something, right? Yeah, 1989, as East Germany is falling and all of that, the Spartacists intervened. I think they did send a lot of their members over there. What did they do? I don't really know, and it's something that they talk about, but I don't know. Putin criticizing Lenin. Yes, he's done that on many occasions. The argument that Putin makes is that Lenin was obsessed with the national question, with granting the right of self-determination to different nations. And Putin argues that this obsession with nationalities weakened the Soviet Union, because it didn't, the people weren't all together. All the different nationalities weren't all unified because there was this obsession with emphasizing national differences among the Soviet peoples. There might be something to that. I don't know. But I think at one point when Putin criticized Lenin, and he did that, the Communist Party got very angry with him, and then he came out and he said a lot of good stuff about Lenin too. That again, it's nuance. There's nuance to all of this, right? In Russia, there's a lot of people that are very proud of the Soviet Union's past, very proud of the defeat of the Nazis. That are also really don't like Lenin and think Lenin was bad for the country. And there's a lot of people who really like Stalin but don't like Lenin in the Soviet Union. So it's complicated, right? There's nuance to all of this, and the way they'll report on Putin in U.S. press is so biased. I've seen many places, they will say Putin mourned the fall of the Soviet Union. Oh my God, oh my, and that's supposed to be like a shocker. Like, who could possibly mourn the fall of the Soviet Union? That means you must be a lunatic. I mean, everyone hates the Soviet. Like, did you know that Putin mourned the fall of the Soviet Union? Oh, I mean, it's just this, like, I'm sorry, but anyone who looks objectively at the fall of the Soviet Union, it was a humanitarian disaster. The country was economically demolished. It ruined the country economically. Any rational person living there would say this is not a good thing. But U.S. media depends on your anti-communist bias, right? You're supposed to sit there and hear that he mourned the fall of the Soviet Union and be like, wow, what an evil man. Everyone in Russia should have been jumping up and down and saying we're free when the Soviet Union fell. That's not what happened. I mean, economically, the fall of the Soviet Union was a nightmare. And so the fact that Putin thinks that the fall of the Soviet Union was a bad thing, I mean, anyone who lived there, I mean, it was economically devastating for the country. So, I mean, but, we don't know that in American media, and so American media doesn't describe what the actual results of the fall of the Soviet Union were. And so that's like scandalous, right? And so it's complicated, right? Again, we don't understand Russian politics, right? And anyone who gets on here and tells you they can understand Russian politics, I mean, we in the United States, we don't really understand Russian politics. I've been over there, and, I mean, I'm sorry, but it's like, I mean, I'm sorry, but there's a lot of people who get on there and will tell me things about Russian politics, and I'll see that, and I hear a lot of weird stuff, and I don't, I mean, again, it's like, they claim certain people in Russia are fascists. It's like, no, they're conservatives. They're on the right. But then in Russia, being on the right means that you're also more socialist economically speaking. And it's complicated, right? And and then, like, there's the Communist Party of the Russian Federation, but the leader of the Russian Communist Party is a Christian and is a supporter of the Russian Orthodox Church. So it's complicated, and a lot of American leftists will like try to like point to stuff in American politics, especially to me, and be like, "Gotcha," and it's like, you don't know, you just don't get it. All right, but anyway, all right, Sub-Saharan African socialism. I don't know. I really haven't been following that region. I just don't know. Nationalizing Amazon and big tech. Yeah, of course, I mean, they're monopolies in every sense of the word. Nationalize them. Don't break them up. Breaking up Amazon would be inefficient. I like the fact that Amazon is one big corporation. Nationalize it. You know what I mean? Don't break it up. I mean, that's the whole thing about monopolies. Oh, we got to break up the monopoly. Why don't you just nationalize it and have it work in the interest of the country overall? There you go. Christianity about surrendering. Well, that's that's how in the times of feudalism Christianity was interpreted, right? The interpretation of Christianity in the time of feudalism was that if you submit in this life, all right, if you surrender and you do everything that you're supposed to do, you follow all the rules, and you endure hardship, you'll be rewarded in the next life. That's very much the feudal interpretation of Christianity. And a lot of things in Christianity that are about like doing what is right despite all odds, making great sacrifices, becoming a martyr, that's something one could very much interpret as being a revolutionary statement. But the way it was interpreted in feudalism in Europe was that, that means that, I mean, it's, you must starve, or you must, suffer at the hands of your earthly oppressors and not resist or whatever. But that's not consistent with, the, the every interpretation. That is one particular interpretation that was carried out during a time of feudalism. That's what that was. So there you go. All right. Um, are we having a crisis of liberal capitalism or a crisis of reactionary nation states? I think we're having a crisis of capitalism, period, of production organized for profit, right? On a global scale, and it's rooted in the problem of overproduction. It's rooted in the fact that we are producing so many goods, and producing so many goods, but the ability of the worker to purchase those goods has decreased. I think this is rooted in overproduction. It's not a crisis of reactionary nation states, and that's a very academic way of framing it. Liberal capitalism or reactionary nation states. It's. I mean, nation states are going to exist, right, to some degree or other. I don't think they're reactionary, right? And the new right of Europe is retreating into more nationalism and trying to break down the European Union. Liberal capitalism, people argue with it, I don't know what that is. I don't know what PMC is. But, liberal capitalism, it's like too much free market stuff. No, I think this is a crisis of production organized for profit. This is a crisis of overproduction. It is the tendency of the falling rate of profit playing out. So there you go. Managerial class. Okay, we'll talk about that. Managerial class. All right. All right. Richard Wolff. Richard Wolff is an amazing man. Every opportunity I have to talk to Richard Wolff is really an honor. It's really great. I've learned a lot from him. His views are different than mine on a number of topics, but he's a brilliant man. I respect him. I really appreciate a lot of things he said, and his debate with Destiny, I thought he did a very good job. I like him a lot. Dare to win, what does the meaning mean? What is the meaning of dare to win? Well, Mao talks about, there's an expression in China they had that he who does not fear death by 1,000 cuts dares to unhorse the emperor. And it's about, having the courage to go out and do the things that are necessary so that you can be victorious. It's about overcoming the tendency to be passive. It's overcoming your fears and daring to win. Go out and dare to win, dare to struggle, dare to win. That it takes courage to go up and stand up and in the face of oppression and fight for yourself, but you dare to win. That's what that means. Maduro saying that Biden was undermined by the U.S. deep state. Well, it's clear that Biden clearly didn't know what was going to happen. I mean, they really had the wrong understanding of what was going to happen when they pulled out of Afghanistan. Biden was surprised at how quickly things fell apart. That's pretty clear. So if this was intentional, if some section of the government was trying to make Biden look bad, I believe it. I mean, I think that's definitely possible. Look, there is a section of the deep state that really wants Kamala Harris to be president. Even though Kamala Harris is wildly unpopular, she would never win an election. They know that. They know that. And so because of that, it may be they're trying to undermine Biden and say, oh, Sleepy Joe, and time to bring Kamala in. She would never win an election. So the only hope she has to become president is Biden stepping down or dying or whatever, and that's not good because Kamala Harris is very dangerous. And I wrote a whole book about it, right? Kamala Harris and the Future of America, so you can check it out. All right, managerial class. No, they're not a separate class, right? And this is, Karl Marx talks about this, managers, there's a term that's used in Marxian analysis. They talk about agents, right? So they don't produce surplus value on the factory floor, but they help the bosses acquire more surplus value by driving other workers. So they're what you call agents, right? They're employed by the capitalists not to produce value, but to drive the workers to produce more value. So in a way, you could argue that they are actually they're on the wrong side of the class struggle, but they're not owners of means of production. Police officers, managers, they're what you call agents. So that is generally the term that's used in Marxian analysis. They're not a separate class, but they're not part of the proletariat. They're agents. Okay, I think one would be surprised at how incompetent certain parts of the deep state are these days, regardless of whether or not this is a psyop. Very good observation, Jay Grimes. That's very true. And that the deep state are not all on the same side. I mean, that's pretty clear. They have different interests among themselves. There are different factions, etc. So on that note, folks, I'm going to cut it off here. A new upsurge in the struggle against U.S. imperialism is now emerging throughout the world. Ever since World War II, U.S. imperialism and its followers have continuously been launching wars of aggression, but the people of various countries have been continuously waging revolutionary wars to defeat their aggression. While the danger of a new world war still exists and the people of all countries must get prepared, revolution is the main trend in the world today. And while the danger of a new world war still exists and the people of all countries must get prepared, revolution is the main trend in the world today. Good night.